And we're going to be discussing today, we've still got Nigel, we haven't let you go, Nigel, have we? But Nigel's going to explain the fact that hundreds of employers face hefty fines after at least 75 illegal migrants were held in a Home Office blitz on dodgy businesses. So can Labour really smash the gangs? Well, Nigel Nelson joins us now to explain what's going on here. Now, Nigel, this looks like good PR, does it not, for the Labour Party? A party that, which, let's not forget, it doesn't exactly have a gleaming track record when it comes to tackling the issue of migration, does it? Well,
and the Home Office is very keen to get this one out,
yes.
So they wanted as much publicity as possible. 75 doesn't sound like an awful lot of people, but bear in mind this was the first week of a crackdown, so that was the haul after the first week. As you've just said, that people will be... businesses will face £45,000 fines for a first offence. It goes up to £60,000 if they do it too often. So it's quite a hefty penalty for the business doing it. The whole intention is, this is the starting point for dealing with the gangs, that most of these people are brought over by the gangs, they don't even get minimum wage payments, that they have to pay back the gang masters for bringing them here, and they live in pretty awful conditions. It's really modern slavery. So stopping this kind of thing does them some good for a start. You get illegal workers who will also be illegal migrants, so there's a question about getting them out of the country. It's a starting point rather than something that is a huge success so far.
Yes, and Nigel, well, I mean, you would have to do many more raids like this to actually tackle the issue, but I was reading in the Brussels Times, I believe it was, that actually there are illegal migrants using logins for other people on delivery apps, whether that be there are a whole host of these food delivery services, and actually working that way, earning an income that way. So you might find that we are in a scenario in which there are people being put up in hotels, for example, that have crossed the English Channel using logins to make cash from these delivery apps. So how on earth can the government tackle so many issues when it seems to be pretty systemic?
Well, I mean, what you're talking about is criminality there.
Yeah.
So all criminals can find different ways around crackdowns that are launched against them. So this would be an example of one of them. I mean, I think that when it comes down to how we actually deal with it in the long run, bear in mind, we're not going to stop boats crossing the Channel immediately. It's going to take time to be able to do it. And the best, I think, that the government can do is reduce the number that come across. But if you could actually tackle these smuggling gangs upstream, you can catch the right people who are behind it. And the difference between this government and the last is they'll use counter-terror laws to do it, hire some spies from MI5 who are experts in this, and see if they can do it that way. It won't end what's going on, but it might make things a bit better.
So the issue is, though, once they actually arrive here, are Labour not de facto granting them amnesty to remain in the country?
No, it's not an amnesty. I mean, the problem you had previously was that the Illegal Migration Act, although it didn't make it illegal to cross the Channel, it made the people who did cross the Channel inadmissible in Britain. So what we had, in fact, the Tories were doing quite well to actually reduce the backlog of people in the system, and suddenly it grew. The latest figures last week is now 119,000. And what these people are, that they are people who can't be admitted to Britain, but they can't leave either. So something's got to be done to try and reduce that backlog, otherwise it just grows as more people cross the Channel. So the idea there is that you will process the asylum claims, which they're entitled to have processed anyway, and see which ones are legitimate to stay here and which ones you send home.
Have you any faith in the fact that, I mean, the British people, if you look at the polling on this, the list of concerns that the public actually have, immigration is on an upward trajectory. We saw after 2016, when the British public voted for Brexit, that actually support or concern around migration went down. quite significantly, actually. It's now shooting all the way back up. Have you any confidence whatsoever that the Labour government can actually buck that trend and start to have the British people feel that there is control over this? Because right now, the narrative very much is that the southern border is a complete free-for-all.
Well, I wouldn't go as far as a free-for-all, but I mean, it is going to be difficult to do it. This is what I mean about don't expect the boats to stop. It was reckless of Rishi Sunak to promise that.
But Australia did it, though, Nigel. We are an island nation. It's not beyond the wit of man, surely.
True. I mean, Australia did do that, but there are huge differences. So, first of all, in the English Channel, there are no international waters between Dover and Calais. So that's the first problem. In Australia, you're talking about 150 miles of international waters between Australia and Indonesia. The second thing there is because of the kind of distances the boats were travelling, the Australians could simply turn them back because they were bigger boats. What we can't do in the English Channel is simply turn a boat back because they're tiny and they'll capsize and people will die.
OK, yeah. But I mean, so you have no truck whatsoever with the idea that leaving the ECHR would actually give the British public a say in who can and can't come here?
No, I don't, because I think that would be irrelevant. Where the ECHR was relevant would be over Rwanda. So if the Rwanda policy had been stopped by ECHR, at the moment there's an emergency stop on it. We don't know if the European Court would have actually stopped it. I can see a purpose to the argument. I don't think we should. I think that Britain is a country that should obey international law, and the ECHR polices international law. So I didn't want us to leave anyway. But the whole point was, I don't think it would have helped.
Well, I mean, I imagine many viewers, Nigel, would argue that the British don't exactly need a European court on how to actually enact law and obey law. You know, as people like to say so often, when people make that argument, Churchill was one of the founding participants in the ECHR, creating the ECHR itself as a living, breathing document. But I mean, the idea that we are not some law-abiding nation. We just want to be able to have some semblance of control, and I don't think that's asking for the world.
We wouldn't be a law-abiding nation if we then broke international law. So if we chose to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, we'd be joining Russia and Belarus as the other people who also don't obey international law.
I imagine there's quite a difference between what we would do and what they do, though, Nigel. But we'll leave it there. Nigel Nelson, thank you very much I do appreciate you joining me, especially after you've been on there for the last 2 hours. Right, folks, we're going to bring in the former police officer and border control expert, Henry Bolton. Henry, thank you very much for your company. You've heard what Nigel has had to say there, his analysis. What's your take?
Well, starting with the ECHR and Belarus and Russia, I mean, most of the world is not part of the signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights. Let's be clear on that. It's not about breaking international law. It's about removing ourselves from a convention that, whilst we're part of it, is international for those countries that are signatories to it. So nobody's talking about breaking international law or violating international law. It's simply withdrawing from a convention that has a legal status. So let's clear that up. Going back to the if I may, the 75 illegal workers who've been detained, the 220 businesses that are now being fined. So actually 220 businesses have been now detected as having employed workers illegally. Only 75 workers have been detained. But something that's important to note about this is that the measures that are being implemented now are measures that aren't new. These are measures that were brought in by Robert Jenrick when he was immigration minister on the 8th of August, I think it was 7th or 8th of August last year. So there's nothing new in this. The Labour government is trying to get a load of PR out of it. I understand that. That's politics. But the reality is that there's nothing new about this approach, and that those fines, if you like, were established a year ago by the Conservative government. And the other thing is, we shouldn't be seeing an operation of this sort, a sort of surge. This sort of activity should be ongoing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And then there might be a deterrent to these businesses and indeed the migrants working illegally in this way. So there's a whole lot of things there. I mean, there's nothing, there's nothing special about what's been happening now. It should be happening every day.
Now, Henry, one of our viewers, Alison, says, when we voted for Brexit, I, for one, expected us to be able to deport criminals and people who have absolutely no right to be here. How have we ended up in the scenario in which the United Kingdom is rendered completely unable to actually deport people, 100,000 who may well be given the right to stay here, no questions asked, throwing their papers overboard upon entry? How on earth have we ended up in this scenario in which human rights law has been utterly twisted to render us completely useless when it comes to border management?
Well, the first thing to say about Brexit is Brexit gave us control of our borders and of our immigration to a large extent. There are some we know about the Refugee Convention, we know about the European Convention on Human Rights and so on. There are some various sort of pieces that mean that what I'm going to say is not 100%, but Brexit largely gave us control over our borders and over our immigration policy. What we failed to do is plan and prepare to take that control, and I would argue that we still haven't actually taken control. So it's been a failure not of Brexit, but of our own leaders, our own government, both the Conservative government and now the Labour government. And I don't expect the Labour government to really seize this opportunity with both hands and huge enthusiasm. So I don't think it's going to happen. What needs to happen is that we actually need to, as you say, start deporting people. But to do that, you need a coordinated approach to agreements with the countries that these people come from. So you need a national strategy that pulls all the various strands of government together, that creates unified effort against directed sort of or objectives from the Prime Minister, from the Cabinet, if you like. So what we've not had up until now is the diplomatic effort of the Foreign Office combined with the operational efforts of the Home Office and so on, working together as one team. We've seen two different teams working sort of in a disjointed manner. But the other thing to say, that needs to change. And I hope, I don't know who it's going to be, but I hope the new Border Security Commander has the vision and the ability and the competence and the knowledge and the experience to actually pull that and the authority to pull that together. We will see it. But the other thing is that we have to recognize that we cannot send people back to countries that we have no relations with and that we can't ourselves go to. So Afghanistan, Iran, North Korea, and so on. And so there is a problem with with people who come here from those countries. We can't send them back. There's not a practical, legal, or diplomatic way of doing it. So what should we do? Well, that was the reason that the previous government came up with Rwanda. We would then have somewhere to send this particular category of people who we're not giving them leave to remain, but we can't send them back to their home country. So where can we send them? Rwanda was the solution. This government has abandoned Rwanda. So the plan now of the Home Secretary, as I understand it, is to allow these people not to get rid of them, but to allow them, this is the effective amnesty, so it's an amnesty in all but name, to allow them to enter the community, live in the community. They will now have equal priority over housing to British people. They will have access to the welfare and benefit system, and they will be able to work. That is the plan. So that will have a knock over the lifetime of the people who are already in that category. It's about £18 billion that's been estimated to have an impact on the welfare budget. So 18 billion. So this is where we're going with it. There is no coherent national strategy pulling all the various strands and efforts of government together, the various departments and so on. There is no clear set of objectives, and we still haven't heard from the present government what they want to achieve by this in terms of the small boats or in terms of the overall figures of net immigration. Absolutely, and I think it's rather telling that they've struggled to actually employ someone to be chief of this new Border Command operation. So, Henry, we'll leave it there. I think I would make you the head of the Border Command, Henry Bolton. That's what I would do. But I did apply for it, Darren. Yeah. Oh, you did you? I did. And I was told that I have no relevant experience and didn't even get an interview. So they know who they want.